British data analytics firm Cambridge Analytica, the firm at the center of Facebook's election manipulation scandal and who were behind the presidential campaign for President Uhuru Kenyatta back in 2013 and in 2017, initiated a smear campaign against Raila Odinga, his opponent, in a bid to influence voters. Now, the smear campaign used fake news and disinformation against Odinga and on key election issues such as health, infrastructure, and terrorism. The revelations are in a video secretly recorded by broadcasted by Britain's Channel 4 News after 4 months of undercover investigations. Now, the video shows how the firm's bosses boasted about using dirty tricks to help swing election countrywide, including in Kenya, where they say they ran President Kenyatta's re-election campaign. Now, the president's campaign team denies the engagement or these engagements with Cambridge, while the firm says the news reports misrepresented their activities, as Sheila Sendeo reports.
An undercover investigation by British TV station Channel 4 lifts the lid on how an online information war shaped the 2017 presidential election campaign. Behind this battle for power fought through social media was UK data analytics firm Cambridge Analytica. The firm is at the center of controversy across the world after reports emerged that the company has been harvesting personal data about Facebook users since 2014. In this news report, the firm's bosses boasted how they've been using dirty tricks to sway elections in many parts of the world, including honey traps and potential bribery to discredit politicians. Here in Kenya, they say they ran President Kenyatta's presidential campaign, even though his campaign team denies this. Part of their work included a smear campaign against Raila Odinga. Mark Turnbull, the managing director of Cambridge Analytica's Political Global, says they engineered a digital campaign that painted President Kenyatta in positive light while smearing his main rival Raila Odinga. Online ads for The Real Raila and Uhuru for Us flooded Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube accounts throughout the country. The smear campaign used distorted video messages featuring apocalyptic scenes with one message, "Stop Raila, Save Kenya." This fake news and disinformation about Raila Odinga touched on key election issues that mattered the most to voters, such as health, infrastructure, terrorism. As the firm's bosses said in the undercover video, it was all about whipping up emotions. And in a presidential campaign that was not short of emotion, they also revealed what exactly they delivered for the Jubilee campaigns, including rebranding the party, writing their speeches, and doing surveys. President's campaign team denies they ever enlisted their services. The firm has also dismissed the Channel 4 report as a misrepresentation of their work. The firm is at the center of a dispute over the harvesting and use of personal data, which could have also been used to influence the outcome of the 2016 US presidential election and the UK Brexit referendum. The firm denies any wrongdoing. Facebook has since suspended the accounts of Strategic Communication Laboratories, the firm's parent company, for violating its policies. Facebook says Cambridge Analytica obtained user information without their approval.
Right, the hashtag is PressPass. That establishes our conversation tonight at David Osiany, at WM Njoya, at Saddique Shaban, at Gathara, at Ken Mijungu, at NTV Kenya. Tweeters with your comments regarding Cambridge Analytica and its activities. Let me begin with the lady and a general view. I know you have made comments about this, but a general view of what may or what may have not happened in Kenya regarding the involvement of Cambridge Analytica.
Okay, I think that Jubilee hired Cambridge Analytica just by looking at the conversations we were having in August, because there was a trend of the bots bombarding us, and there was a specific trend that looked like bots for hire. And then of course we had already started seeing the reports, I think it was in The Guardian, about Cambridge Analytica's work in the referendum. And I think that's when Kenyans started making the connection between Jubilee's campaign and Cambridge Analytica. So this conversation has been going on since August last year. We were not surprised by the news. Do I think they influenced the vote? I think their work was more to convince us to accept the vote rather than to convince us how to vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Let me go to Gathara.
Well, I think, I mean, there's two elections that Cambridge have claimed that they were part of, that is 2013 and 2017. Now, we know from Jubilee, from Dennis Itumbi's helpful tweet, that they did engage SEL, which is the mother company to Cambridge Analytica, in 2013. You know, and I think one of the things that you see in both of these campaigns has been kind of the very polarizing discourse that has been pushed. And I would say I think their main role was not so much to convince people who would have voted for Raila to vote for Uhuru. I don't think that would have ever happened. I think their main role was really to consolidate the vote within the various tribal enclaves for Uhuru to push the turnout. And I think that by polarizing the debate, by making it seem like this is a life or death issue, you know, for particular tribes, that was what was going to push lots of people to turn up at the polling stations. You know, so, and I think that was the main goal of the campaign. It's not, I mean, I've heard many people criticize or suggest that we've always voted tribally, so, I mean, they would have minimal effect. Okay. I think that misses the point. The point is actually to drive the turnout. There is just to polarize the debate so people feel they've got to turn out, feel they've got to vote to defend their ethnic interest.
All right. Saddique.
I mean, up to this time, Cambridge Analytica is still boasting on its website that they did help Jubilee government in 2013 and 2017. If there was any denial of any type, then Jubilee would have probably threatened legal challenge or issued demand letters, you know, lawyers, because we've seen Uhuru Kenyatta launching an international, you know, legal campaign when he was a suspect at the ICC. So this should have really been a walk in the park. It's quite telling that a company, you know, in Britain could make such allegations in broad daylight and in fact, using a picture of the president in campaign in making that, and that telling us that, look, we did help in not just branding, you know, also the messaging, the content, which now is the subject of all the conversation around here. So I think what we missed as a country is what Channel 4 has done. I probably, you know, put it on the fore, and the point we are saying is all these things was hidden in plain view. Did we see it? Did we not see it? And if we did see, what did we see that probably we are now talking about now? Was it obvious? If it was obvious, then who are the players behind that obvious show that was, you know, being played on very personal levels? We are talking about not on television, but we're talking about on cell phones, on messaging, you know, social media pages which are very personal. And these are pages that are protected by password. So you see the intention was really to go into the nerve endings of people. Okay. And I think that message is what came through to Kenya.
Succeeded. So, Osiany.
Thank you very much, Ken. I was privileged to experience the Brexit campaign in the UK firsthand. I was in school in the UK when Boris Johnson, then the Mayor of London, and Michael Gove led a campaign that shocked me. Whereas it was pretty obvious reasons for Britain to stay in the European Union, how they were able to convince the country and get young people to be so furious and lead the campaign to leave was shocking. That is how I got to first interact with Cambridge Analytica, because then I was pushed to try and study populism, which was just becoming a main, you know, area of discourse globally. And you realize that Cambridge Analytica, as they did in the UK and as they have done in the US and continue to do here, try to pander to our baser instincts. They reach out for the worst in all of us and then try to use the worst in all of us to make money. Then they leave the country torn and exit the scene. I am shocked that Jubilee would deny the involvement of Cambridge Analytica, because that denial in itself makes us question, so what then did they do? Because on its own, hiring Cambridge Analytica was not a problem, so long as they operated above par. Remember that Cambridge Analytica is accused in North America or in the US of gaining access to people's private information. In fact, Christopher Wiley, the 28-year-old gentleman, Canadian, who whistle blew on this matter, said that there were instances when they could even gain access to private messages. Now, he did not specify in which country these happened. But what they would then do is study your mode of communication, profile you psychologically, then modify and customize advertisements that would be appealing to your baser instincts, that would make you angry and, you know, then get out the worst of you. That way then, you would be able to follow or pursue to the logical conclusion what their intention is, which was, in the different cases, to vote for different people. So yes, Cambridge Analytica was here, but what would we accuse them for?
Okay.
I think for me, it's pretty clear, not even for me, it's a fact, as Gathara has put it. Cambridge Analytica was hired because there was a support base. Remember, ahead of the elections, particularly in Nyeri, there had been a very low voter turnout. And I remember, because it's in media, that Major General Karangi was sent to go and get people out to vote and ensure that the people there vote, because they had felt left out in the government then.
Okay.
So Cambridge Analytica came in to solidify, sadly, to solidify the vote on the basis of hate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
If I may, that we really should keep our eye on is that the tactics that they're accused of using are essentially tactics that were developed by militaries.
Yeah.
You know, and for me the most disturbing thing is actually weaponizing, using military tactics against your population to get a point. These were psyops that they use in wars. So in essence, it's the government going to war with its own people, you know, and to try and influence them using tactics that they essentially use to target enemies. You know, and that, and how that then undermines a democracy when you've got all this profusion of whether it's fake videos, you know, and stuff. It becomes hard for us to be able to articulate issues, to deal with issues, because elections should be forums where we talk about the problems we have,
yes,
and what's the best way to fix them.
My
But
question
they are
on that
changing
point,
to
Gathara, my
something
question
else.
is, what is our real concern as Kenyans? Our real concern, is it because they were involved in the election, or is it that they may have manipulated our election in a way or?
Well, I think for me, it's simply that idea of being able to weaponize the discourse so that people are pushed to, even in some cases, vote against their own interest.
Okay.
You know, and I think we need to be careful not to, I think, overstate too much what they did. I think they planted seeds, but they were working within fissures that already existed.
Exactly.
We didn't need Cambridge Analytica in 2007.
All right.
You know, so those fissures were here, but what they did quite effectively, I think, is to really exploit them and to create the seeds and the ways of conducting political discourse that means till today is still difficult for us to sit down and have cogent conversations about the problems that we face as society.
I think, all right.
Gathara has just mentioned something which I think, if you look at 2007, it's not entirely true that Cambridge Analytica wasn't there. It's just a different manifestation now in 2017. We've had our own homegrown equivalents of Cambridge Analytica, right. Politicians, telecom companies that are using our data. You know, you at home, and then you see a message, cheap loan, 5% interest, and who gave someone my number? So these are manifestations of some of these things. But crucially, Ken, how is it that up to this time, against all odds, we still have very active YouTube pages still up and running.
Okay.
Still talking about stopping Raila and all those kind of related propaganda material that we have seen. Elements of entrapment and other illicit ways that have now been associated with Cambridge Analytica. And we're talking about, for instance, YouTube, where if you look at that page now, online, no fewer than 20 videos. And it does not escape us that the person who is in charge of our ICT is in fact a former Google chief. So if indeed there were elements of, look, let's save this country, that page should have been taken down
by now.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are talking also about many other forms of, how it's spread, including blogs, websites, which are all still live at this point. So the whole element of really who brought Cambridge Analytica here is very primary to us, because it's not just that they were brought here. They have been fed, they have been pampered, they have been made to feel at home, and in fact, we should as well give them Kenyan ID cards and make them citizens.
Okay, let me just, before we take a break, yes. I think for me, what this brings us to is to question ourselves broadly on very important things. Number one, it will surprise Kenyans that we do not even have a data protection law in this country. Kenya does not have a data protection law. So if someone went to Safaricom and printed your messages, my friend, there is nowhere you're taking that guy. You can take Safaricom, they will just have run against their own commitment, but there is no data protection law in this country. Right. Okay. If there is no data protection law, then we find ourselves in the place where America finds itself. You see, America have known, and there is fact, and there's confession by Christopher Wiley, by all these other guys, Turnbull, Alexander Nix, name them, that they were involved in America and got into people's profiles. But because America has not had a data protection law, unlike the UK, America is unable to punish Cambridge Analytica. So they have to harp on Cambridge Analytica's involvement with Russia against Hillary, in favor of Trump, to try and punish them. Now, that begs the question. We have had all these great minds. Joe Musheru is one of the most brilliant IT people I know. But we have also had Parliament, because it takes legislation to make them. We are currently discussing the cybercrime bill in Parliament. It hasn't been passed yet. And it has been discussed merely because MPs were bullied the other day and cyber pictures sent to, nudes. Is that the basis on which we need to react? Has the Parliament failed its people? Haven't we had ICT committees? Have they done enough? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. And now on the issue of Cambridge Analytica, straight after Channel 4 showed that documentary or investigative piece, and there was a lot of reaction, but the Kenyan media did not have the courage to do their own investigative story. Did we know what was happening? That is the question that a lot of people are asking. And if we didn't know, why didn't we know? We have all the facilities, we have data collection, we have the personnel. We could have read into it, but we never read into it. I'd like to read some reactions here, and I begin with some reaction from Nyabola Nanjala. She wrote for Al Jazeera, and these are some of the things she said. First, she said, in 2017, Privacy International claimed that the ruling Jubilee Party spent around $6 million, that's an equivalent of 600 million Kenyan shillings, to contract Cambridge Analytica, while the opposition retained Aristotle and for its own analytics operations. Secondly, she says that she quotes the video actually secretly shot by Channel 4, and Mark Turnbull, the managing director of Cambridge Analytica, says the Jubilee Party, quote, they rebranded the entire party twice, written their manifesto, done 2 rounds of about 50,000 surveys, and that's the reason why even when the campaign teams try to deny this, it's difficult to accept that denial. And Nanjala goes further to say that in one of her conclusions that the Channel 4's undercover investigation affirms that Kenya is Cambridge Analytica's biggest success story, the one they used to lure in politicians who want a shortcut to power, and Cambridge twice built Kenya's ruling party in London's boardroom,
boardroom on the back of a legal and moral vacuum, and they are proud of it, as was showcased in that secret video. And finally, she says in her ultimate conclusion that the rhetoric around the 2017 election in Kenya has damaged lives and livelihoods. Fear of ethnic violence was so high that certain neighborhoods were emptied out. Personal relationships have been irreparably damaged. None of this is illegal per se, but it's deeply immoral, and this needs to count for something. That's a piece that was written for Al Jazeera by Njoya Nanjala, who is a political analyst. And I'd like to quote one from Dr. Wandia, who is here with us in studio today. In one of her recent writing on this issue, titled Media and Academia, Cambridge Analytica's Strange Bedfellows, Dr. Njoya concludes that it does not matter how many Kenyans Cambridge Analytica influence. Even one Kenya is one Kenyan too many. What matters is that it appealed to Kenya's worst fears, essentially hoping to whip up hysteria just so that the president could win a vote. And that's where we begin. And I begin with you. A reaction from your own writing. What informed this kind of writing?
First of all, being a target of bots myself, it was very dehumanizing to be trying to talk about healthcare and education and why they matter for elections. And then you get all these insults. And usually when the insults are targeted at women, they are also sexist. So I did a lot of blocking, but it's still very dehumanizing to go through that kind of thing. And I can imagine how much worse it was for others. So even when we started talking about Cambridge Analytica in August, it was also humiliating to know that there are some foreigners being paid by our own Kenyans to do this to us, to dehumanize us in such a way. So that was part of what informed my post, because I felt it was degrading, honestly. And what is so disturbing about Cambridge Analytica's tactics is that they are dehumanizing to the people, and that's why we find it very hard to discuss the issues. There was also, I don't know whether it's them who did it, but there was also a Facebook page that started posting my posts on Facebook and putting some crazy pictures of people from elsewhere. So you feel violated in a way, because you're approaching cyberspace as a citizen. You want to comment on issues, and the tactic of Cambridge Analytica and like-minded people is to polarize the debate so much to remove the middle ground where you discuss the issues and leave people talking about their identities and ethnicities. And I think I'd like to commend KOT because they withstood a lot of abuse. It was not just me. It was a lot of us who withstood a lot of abuse. And I hope that the people who hired them are ashamed of themselves, because we were able to resist it without the money and the power that whoever paid them had. So I think it's a commendation to Kenyans, but of course there are a lot of people who are still bruised from what happened online.
Trust me, we still have a lot of those online sentiments, and remarkably, most of it, the negative ones, disappeared once the election was done. President Uhuru Kenyatta was sworn in. Gentlemen, I'd like you to comment about this, but Douglas Mwale says Kenyans vote on the basis of tribe and not issues. There's no way Cambridge Analytica could have had any reasonable influence. After all, Uhuru and Ruto traveled to each and every corner of this country campaigning. They earned their positions legitimately. And Leon Lidigo says, like Jubilee, good luck. Jonathan also contracted Cambridge Analytica but lost. Am I wrong to assume that maybe we have overrated Cambridge's effect? Do we mean the majority of Kenyans who voted are on social media or are social media users?
I've got to say again, as I said at the beginning, I think that's a fundamental misreading of what Cambridge Analytica were doing here and what they were hired to do. You know, it's not the case that they would fundamentally change people's voting habits. So if you're inclined to vote for Raila Odinga, that they would give you a message that would convince you that Kenyatta is a better person. I think their work was to really, as Dr. Njoya says, to remove the middle ground, you know, so that we cannot have a discourse and to make this personal, so that everybody says this as existential, the threat, and to really force that through that polarization to get people to feel they've got to register, they've got to get out and vote on the basis of identity, not on the basis of an understanding of the issues that are there. But I also think, and in one of the tweets I've just seen from Kachwanya of Bake, I think he makes a good point that it's good to speak about, even as we speak about Cambridge Analytica, to think of the local people who cooperated with them in this entire effort. Yes. You know, there were many, whatever the communication consultants, etc., who are Kenyans based here, you know, who really participated and pushed the narratives that had been designed and created by Cambridge Analytica. And I think if we are going to have an investigation, as has been called for by some, it should really look at how our discourse is poisoned, you know, by the use of this tactics to influence both how the media reports, you know, and even to just discredit and remove any chance that we have to actually sit down and have cogent discussions about our issues. I think that should be the basis of it, and from there is then we can now start thinking, what are the remedies? You know, are they going to be legal? Are they going to be remedies to do with policy? You know, so let's, you know, and what do we need to do as a society, as a media, you know, to make sure that come the next election, we are not as vulnerable as we turned out to be this time.
We're getting a lot of hate before you comment, Saddique, about not having any person from Jubilee to talk about this in this panel. And obviously, they have denied this, so there's no point. There's nothing further you can say aside from denying. You know? This is and Cambridge Analytica has confirmed, and they continue to confirm, and you put it into perspective, they still have those works in several platforms. I'd like to read one, as you comment, from Kefa Robertson, who says, hashtag PressPass is discussing Jubilee Analytica using a panel well known to have supported NASA, including the moderator Ken Mijungu. If NTV was interested in the truth, why not invite Itumbi, Rafael Tuju, or Sakaja Johnson? Clearly biased.
This is not about Jubilee. Can we make it very clear?
Exactly, that's the point.
This is not about point.
It's not about Jubilee. It's about Cambridge. We're not discussing Jubilee here.
Allow me to say this.
Yes.
Allow me to say this, Ken. Allow me to say this for the benefit of everybody watching on television, national television. This is not about Jubilee, the party. This is not about Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta. This is not about Mr. William Ruto. This is not about Jubilee as it is. This is about a campaign that was launched to entrap this country into a very dangerous ground. And we were led there using instruments of technology, perpetuated by outside forces, as it were, and, you know, received, cultured by people in the Republic of Kenya. So even if anybody from Jubilee, and by the way, there were even people from opposition who were countering that argument using their own version of Cambridge Analytica material. So this is not about NASA, this is not about Jubilee. This is about what the message was and what it actually threatened to do in this country. We have seen, and we've said this many times, and the point that we're trying to make is, did the media become a watchdog or a lapdog?
We'll talk about that next. Yes.
While we're on it, then while we're on it, and probably then we'll talk about that.
Yes.
We look at how is it that the entire country would have missed something as significant as this by a heartbeat. She talked about being troubled online, okay, and inviting a lot of really very personal attacks. I was also, you know, one of the people that received a lot of, I think, I would hasten to say that I think on the online sphere, we seem to be having a lot of more smartphones out there than smart people, if this is what we are talking about. All right, then, because even with all the information online and all that, people still choose to digest and eat that which, you know, will satisfy their feel. But that could be the poison chalice that has now been planted here. What is it that Cambridge Analytica did with the 2016 US elections that is now subject of Robert Mueller's investigation into the alleged collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians. What is it that they did in 2013 election and 2017? In Brexit, again, accusations are flying about. In India, which is holding elections next year, the government, in fact, has moved in to block one of the companies that was actually doing some bit of groundwork. In Russia, again. So this is not about Jubilee. This is about a systemic this is like a world war. This is like a world war now fought online.
Yes.
Probably it's an equivalent of a third world war, but in a very sophisticated manner. And this is what we need to ask. And Gathara said that there are people calling for investigation. In God's good earth, who is going to conduct that investigation and who is going to do it? Are you going to talk about and investigate the very people who are now being accused of being the recipients of the works of Cambridge Analytica? And which government bodies are supposed to do that? The very government bodies that are supposed to see the hatred online, but they kept quiet. The same government bodies that started preaching about peace and telling us Kenyans keep peace, while we know we had peace in this country. The same bodies that are supposed to perhaps investigate ethnic, tensions online and all that. What has the handshake now done? We seem to have forgotten that we actually need to investigate. How much public outcry should come so that things have to move on? And as we shall see in other jurisdictions, unless there's political will to be able to prosecute this issue, then even with the new Director of Public Prosecution, we cannot go anywhere. And that is a tragedy that we are living. We are living in an entrapment. And the point is, how deep did Kenya sink in this time? The media and all the institutions, how probably neck deep are we? And how are we going to get ourselves out of it? Like Gathara said, before the next election. Because we don't need to wait till 2022 to be able to figure out how to get out of there.
David.
Well, let me clarify to the viewer that this, as all my other panelists have said, must not be viewed from the lens of our parties and which parties we support. Rather, there are deeply moral and fundamentally, philosophical questions that have to be answered. I started by making it clear that in any court of law in this country, it's going to be hard to hold Cambridge Analytica responsible for doing anything because there is no law they have broken. Even by accessing your private messages, because we have not shielded the citizens from that. But I also want the Kenyan media not to be too hard on themselves, Ken, because you must know that countries such as, the Britain or England or the UK, countries such as America, are extremely sophisticated countries. If at all, they are the ones who should have read this, but they could not read it too. It took the confession of one young gentleman, two actually, to let the world know this is what has been going on. So whereas Wandia was fighting online, she probably thought this is the usual bile that comes with the campaign times. And you have to appreciate that both sides of the divide hired experts. Jubilee hired Cambridge Analytica, and NASA hired Aristotle. Sadly for NASA, the Aristotle group was deported. They had to leave the country without rendering their services. But both of them were to come, fish data, use the data to try and target different votes. Now, fishing the data and using it to try and message is not a problem if the message is well-intended and well-meaning. If it doesn't polarize the country. Obama became president because he had brilliant people in his team who knew how to use data to target those segments with the correct messaging. All right? Now, I find it problematic if Cambridge Analytica, when Cambridge Analytica say they actually staged the whole Jubilee campaign. And probably that is why they feel a little uneasy. Because then whatever we saw for their supporters, it is in their interest to know that it probably was just staged. They didn't even believe in what they said. So it means even the Big Four agenda may not be anything to hope for.
Could that
because
include,
it
could
was
that include,
staged.
could that include the 5 stadia, perhaps?
Well, you know,
Because I haven't seen any of it. If it's a stage, then probably that's part of it.
So media has to know. We have to look for the organizations that were fronts for Cambridge Analytica in this country. If you read the young gentleman, the 24-year-old, is called Shamir Sani in the UK, who has now opened the lead on Cambridge Analytica's involvement in trying to avoid the referendum laws that cap the amounts that are used in campaigns, then you will know that they used different fronts in different organizations in different contexts. Now, for Kenya, our question ought to be, is there an organization they use, and can we get that one good Kenyan who will tell us the extent to which Cambridge Analytica was involved in our campaigns? We don't know it yet. Okay. You only record the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, Alexander Nix, confessing, together with his managing director, Turnbull, confessing that they would even use hookers to get anyone who stands in their way.
Not necessarily in Kenya, though.
They didn't mention the country. That is why I'm saying we do not understand the whole and entire extent of the activities in this country until we get a whistleblower, an insider who will tell us what really happened.
Well, I've got to say, I think that as part of, being in advocacy, we really have to hold the people who are in charge in government to account. The fact is, we have every right to demand that we have an honest, open, public investigation into what happened. No, actually, let me say this. I mean, everybody kind of laughs away at it. But when Goldenberg was investigated, it wasn't in government's interest to investigate it. You know, they were forced to do it. You know, and it is up to us to figure out how to force government to do the job that we hire it to do, that we pay it to do. Sitting back and simply saying that it's the political will that matters is not their political will that matters. It is our political will. It's up to us to say that no, we know that there is manipulation that's going on, you know, over electoral processes, you know, and we don't like it. You know, it was interesting when you looked at the polls that came out immediately after the Supreme Court verdict was announced. And one of the most amazing one was that in Jubilee areas, people were saying that yes, that it was good the election was annulled. Because fundamentally, all those guys also wanted a fair poll. You know, and this is my thing, is if we can get together as Kenyans and refuse to be divided by what the politicians want, but to sit back and say what is in our interest. Today it might be, you know, being used against Raila. Tomorrow it will be against somebody else.
True.
You know, and the target, don't forget, is you the Kenyan. You know, and until then we insist that we want government to do the work that they applied for, that we gave them the jobs that we pay them for, and to ensure that our data is not just protected, but also our democracy is not allowed to be subverted in the way that it has been in the last 2 elections.
I'd like to take a break, Saddique.
But before you take a break, let me...
Could I just rejoin that?
Say something also.
I want to quote Wandia.
Let us identify who Cambridge Analytica is and their surrogates, because until then we're able to get a hold of either corporate person or representative, then all of this could just be air talk. We saw from the Channel 4 documentary that the CEO officials were saying, look, in countries where we operate, sometimes we want to go in incognito and get out without any stamps, any footprints whatsoever. You wouldn't even know.
We even use other companies.
Absolutely. You wouldn't even know that we were there. Could we have elements of those kind of confessions in Kenya? If, like someone has said, some of those PR companies that were doing, you know, political works, journalists have been accused of, in fact, being on the forefront of this thing. We have seen corporates saying to have backed that campaign, financed that campaign. We have also seen accusations are flying in that, in fact, some telco companies provided data, you know, of everybody that is on their network. So unless we get to that point, then it will be impossible. And I'm saying this because in the US now, the Federal Trade Commission
have to take a break.
is investigating this. In the UK, 2 inquiries are going on. In the US, but what about Kenya? Gathara, who is going to do it?
Yeah,
the handshake has already undone this. The handshake has already undone any political goodwill.
It's up to us to demand it. As I said, the political goodwill is not Raila's or Uhuru's.
Who will?
It must be from the citizens.
Which institutions? Which political will again? It must be anchored on. It must be anchored on some structure.
Actually, we can demand it. We can have public inquiries. I mean, they're there and they have happened before. You know,
I think it's noble. It's noble what you're saying, Gathara. What you're saying is noble. Jubilee has denied any involvement. I don't think anyone could be on the way of such investigations.
I agree.
No, when you see,
they were never involved. They were never involved in this.
you know, I think I read.
Under all fairness, they have said they were not involved.
The current government.
So would it be easy? Would it be easy then to call for a public inquiry on this?
And the US are beneficiaries of Cambridge Analytica. They are investigating them.
So could
and
this,
my question is this: Why do we sit in the position and saying no, we can't do it?
So it is possible. Then
we're just giving them a through pass.
What Gathara is saying.
Then it's possible
Saddique.
for us to say then, as this country, since, as Ken said, in all fairness, we don't want to accuse anybody, Jubilee has denied it.
They've denied it.
NASA say they have nothing to do with it. So let us imagine that if a public inquiry is called out, then there's nothing to hide and people will agree to that process. I think make it in fact judicial.
Okay.
Saddique,
that'll be great,
I think I agree with Gathara to this extent. You know, the NRA in America has been one of the organizations that's untouchable. So as people have been killed because we have the Ku Klux Klan itself at the top of American leadership, the arms and talking about guns has been a no-go zone because the NRA is the most powerful organization. But when on the 14th, kids were shot dead, for the last 4 days in the US, the campaign by the citizens on the streets, young people pouring themselves out and saying, guys, we are tired of being shot dead, both white and black. It's been so massive that it has compelled the very Republican Congress and even Senate to engage on tweaking bits of that law that Obama could not do. Okay? And so, whereas there is an element of pessimism, and it's right to be pessimistic in an organization like this, because even if we go to Golden Bag, the perpetrators have never been held to account, all right? So we know who they were. Right. But if we are not able to show...
a lot of what we know is because...
It's good. It's because we had the process.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's why I concur.
Okay.
And because it is in the interest of the country to leave us as segregated people. I think it is Wandia who wrote that if these people realize we are able to cobble ourselves around the theme or tribe called the jobless,
there will be tear gas right at the
my
moment.
Friend, because the youth in Kikuyu and the youth in Migori will understand this language of joblessness. So it is in their interest to avoid having these conversations and people rallying around such and to put us in our ethnic enclaves. But is there a possibility that we are able to hold the country to account, to force them or compel them at least to do a level of investigation?
Okay.
I think it's possible.
Right, a good place to take a break. I'd like to read one comment from a journalist, so one of the few who had the courage to talk about this, albeit after the fact, after Channel 4 had aired this piece. Larry Mado contributed to Washington Post, and this is what he says. What we know is that Cambridge Analytica helped hijack Kenya's democracy. It manipulated voters with apocalyptic attack ads and smeared Kenyatta's opponent, Raila Odinga, as violent, corrupt, and dangerous. I'd like to come back and begin from there because we, the media, we're being accused even online. Kenya is ours, says, talking about issues is only good when there's something that will be done to make good on the damage. The media, where did we miss it? Why didn't we notice there was something going on? Is it because elections are traditionally and inherently polarizing so much that even negative messaging coheres with our conscience? We expect that politics is a dirty game. So even the media, instead of concentrating for where is the source of this information, we concentrated on that information. And mark you, it was not only on social media. Some of these adverts rain on the local television. The messaging, the kind of messaging was directed to the voters. The some that rain in the mainstream media, and we realized that they said that they even rebranded Jubilee twice and written their manifesto and done 2 rounds of surveys, about 50,000 of them.
Okay, what I said on my blog was that we have to read Cambridge Analytica in a context. It was not just Cambridge Analytica that was polarizing us. It was the whole system. We had, for example, the international media who are insisting that NASA supporters are sycophants. We had researchers. In fact, just today, there's been a debate on Facebook about some particular researchers who have been writing academic articles on the Kenyan elections. And people are now starting to call them out, especially because they received funding from the UK. So there was a whole system, and what the media did wrong, I would say, is not even to follow the Cambridge Analytica story. What they did wrong was to focus on politicians. We didn't have an analysis of the manifestos, for example. The few people who did it, it backfired. So they kept following the politicians on the trail and never asked, what does this mean? What do the manifestos mean for healthcare? What do they mean for education? What do they mean for environment? And those were the hot button issues which some of us were trying to push. And the job of Cambridge Analytica and the hired bots was to suppress that middle ground. So when the press did not pick up these issues, then that was where the problem was, because they were playing into the agenda of Cambridge Analytica.
Why do you think we didn't pick up these issues?
It's habit and tradition.
Yeah. Okay.
We've been doing this for 50 plus years. I mean, since colonial times, everything Kenyan is defined by tribe. So even if you look at the research, which was what I was trying to tell Africa Uncensored, that if you look at the research on Kenyan elections, even the researchers have been always analyzing elections by tribe. They never analyze by economic inequality, by gender, by income, by migration. There are so many other factors, and yet academic research on Kenya has always been about tribe and how it influenced elections. So it's a whole system. Press, media, and that's why I called them bedfellows. Press, media, politicians, even the clergy, because the clergy will tell you, don't follow this man who is going to make you kill others, but it's still a focus on the man and not on saying, look at our area, these are the issues, what are we going to say about them? How can we, as Christians or Muslims or whatever, or whichever faith we follow, what is our position on healthcare, for example? We tried to push the church into talking about healthcare, and they wouldn't, and then they show up telling us peace. So immediately when we keep following the politicians, we are helping Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica just digitized and ran with the baton, but it was us who were running the race, and this has to stop. Academics, because I am one, we have to start asking questions about how we are researching about elections.
Tell me something, Daktari. How would the media have picked the propaganda? Because all this was in the propaganda, the kind of messaging. How would we have picked the propaganda and ignored the fact that we would be supporting a faction if we picked the propaganda and talked about that propaganda?
But that's what I'm saying. Talk about other issues. Get the politicians to tell us what are they going to do with healthcare.
We did not concentrate on the propaganda, because then we could have not found out that there was a force behind them, because we decided to stay away from it.
But the propaganda,
yes,
it was so obvious, and even Kenyans started flagging it on Twitter. Like the Raila apocalyptic video, there was another one on zombies, which was on the KEPSA timeline. And we kept asking them, can you tell us if you have links to the people who did the Raila apocalypse ad? And there was silence, and these were issues that the media could have picked up. Okay. Those ads were poison. I mean, you didn't have to like Raila, but they were poison for your mind, even whether you liked him or not. And that is what the media should have picked up. But I think the cameras were on the politicians, on the campaign trail, and that's where the first mistake was. Forget the politicians. Let's start talking about the issues and get the politicians to say where they stand on the issues. And you'll be surprised. These politicians have no clue what is happening in Kenya.
Shall I
even that bill we are being told about, the only problem was the woman who was sending some funny pictures to them.
That's all.
They are not thinking about our kids whose data is being collected in the high school. Even in the universities, our data is being collected. Politicians have said nothing. Okay. They're just worried about their phones.
Okay. Shall I add on this research thing? I think one of the things that the media must decide to invest in is counter-research. Now, you're not going to air characters who pretend to be intellectuals or academics. And then, because they are from the academia, they come and bandy their truths. And that truth is not even verified. And times on end, as Wandia had indicated in her article, which I agree with, research in most political cases are done backwards, from the conclusion headed back to the sample, not vice versa, as ought to be the research practice. So they will come and say, in central Kenya, people love Uhuru Kenyatta. So every research they're doing is done with that notion, that end game in mind. And they will say, in Luo Nyanza, Raila is loved. So when they will come up with research, it will be a research paper that feeds into a narrative that's already existing and then perpetuates that narrative. So they do not go to other places around the country that look a lot more neutral. So whereas I started by saying, yes, the media cannot be too hard on itself, it would take a whistleblower to know the whole extent of the engagement of Cambridge Analytica in the political process and in the campaign of this country. That's fair enough. The media failed in this regard, having very sober people and a team. You must not just bring one person and say, now this is going to be our yardstick of the truth as regards research. You must have a team behind the scenes who will do a verification. Is it verifiable what Wandia writes? Is what Mutahi Ngunyi, for example, when Mutahi Ngunyi writes tyranny of numbers and the media runs with tyranny of numbers, they are perpetuating someone's standpoint that is full of falsifications.
And I also said that once, that the media gets mesmerized by people with papers. Please do not, even by me. Don't get mesmerized by titles. Question them. Like that tyranny of numbers, I'm so surprised that it took a whole 5 years and nobody ever asked, where did you get these numbers from? How did you calculate this? They just saw a title and somebody sitting very dignified and they ran with the story. So people need to stop listening to media like magicians. They are not priests. They are human, and the research they are doing is deeply flawed, and that must be looked into. And so the media, one of the major mistakes they've been making is to listen to researchers.
One of the things that has really, and Osiany, I beg to differ with you on an issue of say. From an insider point of view, I think the media ought to be ashamed of itself. I do not know whether we can defend our coverage of not just the 2013 election, but the one has just ended. I mentioned earlier that we became lapdogs instead of watchdogs. And that rings true in some of the articles that are still presently online up to this time, which are now being debunked by new information about Cambridge Analytica. When Miguna comes here and drops a word such as demagogue, and
we respond to its sound.
It trends for a long time because it's a big word and media gets scared. What about when he drops a words like anti-disab and what is the word? Anti-disab and
establishmentarianism.
Anti-disestablishmentarianism. Yes. All right. So what are we going to do? Are we going to go on Google and wow at this word for a whole week? We must read. We must read as members of the media. We must not be cowed by titles. Some of these are honorary titles. They are not academic titles. They're not on. They are just doctors of law, honorary causa. These are
or bots.
Or bots. But the point I'm trying to make is this: when we embed journalists on political parties chasing politicians, time over time and days on end. And then we see materials flying around on our phones, yet we do not ask the politicians, okay, to say something, to rebuke it, or to do something about it. We are failing. If you, for instance, and I'm going to use 2 examples here so that it does not appear as if you're targeting one point. If you are a Kenyan journalist embedded to the Jubilee party, you flew with the Jubilee choppers, you flew with the Jubilee fixed wing, you were very close to the president, you got the president's ear. You got one-on-one with the president. Yet you did not ask the president, Mr. President, sir, you are the flag bearer of Jubilee. There is something here targeting your rival, Raila Odinga. It's saying, Raila this, Raila this. Mr. President, what do you say? Do we have any journalists who went on record and we can look at that material and say, yes, I did ask the president? If you were on the other side, you got Mr. Raila Odinga's ear, and there were bots, allegedly from Jubilee, 37 bloggers, on the hotel that is said to be just next to this building here, running those campaigns. And you came across that, yet you didn't say. Then I think you wasted your journalistic capital on a short-term gain. And that is a tragedy. We keep saying over and over again that the media in this country must evolve with time. Time has come where, just like technology is catching up with medicine, law, media must evolve. It's not about buying the latest cameras and have state-of-the-art studios and all that. There's got to be a qualitative element to our growth. If we can sit here and not be able to question some of the things we are saying, then, gentlemen, we can as well close shop and run soap operas on this, because, again, that content is available. Yeah, well, if we are about entertaining people, then I tell you, there's Netflix and there are so many things. Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make, Ken, is let's look at ourselves and say, if we are to look at now in retrospect at Cambridge Analytica, already, as with the 2007 election, the media has again been caught in the whole web. They couldn't do anything because, first of all, they received broadcast money, advertising funds that were coming in from either party. They were online adverts that were embedded on media pages, websites of the media houses. There were sponsored articles running alongside news items and editorial pieces. Then, what gives us the moral high ground right now to look back and point a finger at Cambridge Analytica when we had the chance to corroborate? You saw how media houses both went, blew open the budget. They had very big studios, anchors and presenters, hour on end. Did we have a program, a specialist program to tackle that? I haven't seen it online. I haven't seen it anywhere. Look, the other part that we may have missed and which played a big role, completely unmonitored, are the radios. The mode of entrapment, propaganda, and illicit tactics that then wrapped up the message of Cambridge Analytica was translated into vernacular language, and it was broadcast in radio stations. And the problem we are having is that unless we find a mechanism to monitor what these radio stations are talking about, then we would start burning from the nerve ends of our bodies in terms of...
Let me respond. What I'll say is I think that, and I've been saying this for a long time, our media essentially privileged drama over content. We saw it throughout, from the pre-election period throughout last year, to be honest, where, and they set up this stage, where people like Cambridge Analytica could come and play on, because suddenly the issues weren't important. The drama was, the politics was. And let's not forget, the media pocketed illegal ads that they knew were illegal, from the PDU, and they were quite happy to take that money.
It's true, we did stories on that.
They were quite happy to take the money, and then
someone actually telling them in court.
Exactly. And then set up what they told us would be up to the minute reporting on the election, that somehow did it happen, etc. They were complicit from day one. And I totally agree with Saddique. I think the media has to be really, really ashamed, of how it carried itself off during the election, and not just this one, in 2013 as well. And I think that if we had a situation where our media privileged the issues, privileged the people, not the politicians, so that what we are looking at is not the interest of a small group of people, but the interest of everybody else, if it's not about the drama, so you don't say, I'm going to have a show, I'm going to bring a Jubilee guy and I'm going to bring a NASA guy, and that somehow this is an objective show. All you want is the fight between them, you know, the drama, that's all you want.
Ratings. Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
know, so by doing that, you create the space so that people are no longer conditioned to expect a lucid discussion of issues during elections. And that's what allows people like Cambridge Analytica to come in and play it. And this didn't just happen here. Throughout, even in the West, really it has been the media demeaning itself, you know, searching for eyeballs rather than actually doing its work, that creates the space for these sorts of companies to come and weaponize that discourse and to start undermining democracies. So it's quite important, I think, for media to start to sit back, and I think even absent the sort of investigation I would want, independent, even a judicial one, you know, into the role of people like America. The media should be investigating itself, looking at its own role and asking, what did we get wrong and what can we change going forward?
I agree.
think as a
I will
point,
not allow Saddique
yes,
to talk.
Saddique,
let him respond.
Saddique, I will not allow Saddique. Now, I will not be as obese as Saddique with my words, but I want to.
Now you're dropping big words that you're trying to avoid the media station. Could you also now, for the benefit of the viewer, just small words?
Now this is it. Saddique disagrees with me, but I think he doesn't understand what I mean. When I say I will excuse media to the extent that I think it was very hard for them to pick the involvement of a third party in the hatred and hate messages that were going on in the country. It's not because I'm vindicating media from doing its objective role as being the watchdog and the people's voice. No. They abdicated that duty, and that we agree with. But I have a little background in political psychology, and I said political psychology of populism. So I know when, for example, when you go, look at what Steve Bannon has been able to do with the white supremacists in America. And Steve Bannon and Robert Mercer, who have been damaging America, were the biggest funders of Cambridge Analytica. Yeah. The way that it works is it is fed so systematically, so believably. When it is customized for your consumption, by the time you consume it, you act as though you're acting on your own impulse. So it would have been very hard for media, however intelligent, to pick it. Saddique is a journalist. He didn't pick it, and yet he's very intelligent. Why? Because of the way it was systematically done. Now, you would think that we've just become angry. And media should have flagged down, I agree, Saddique, media should have flagged down the amount of hate messages going on in there. But was media going to be able to pick out that a foreign company has come into the country to tilt us this way?
A foreign company that
it was
said
easy.
that they don't have to come.
It was actually easy.
Wouldn't have known the way.
It was very easy. Unless
where are the media investigations now into Cambridge Analytica? Why is it that it takes Channel 4 UK
and we're still we're still reporting what Channel 4 did?
No, all you're doing is regurgitating
what Channel 4 did. And that's
where our own sources that are going in, because you are embedded in these campaigns.
But
where are your sources to come and say, well, here is what
that presumes
saw. You know, where are our media investigations?
Okay,
I agree. But
look, the media have gone to the county governments to be the director of communication. The media, hang on. Let me say this.
Saddique, let me say this. I think that point is made about the media.
Yeah.
I'd like us to move on. I'd like us to move on.
But I have to quit.
There's a lot of questions that
the presumption by Gathara is then that the Observer or Guardian or Channel 4, on their own volition, out of their own investigation, and not on the volition of Christopher Wiley,
yes, exactly,
that they went and got the information.
So we need someone
a guy who got
tired
of what's going on in the world and said, man, we cannot
use
data.
We actually need a few people. We need a few people in Kenya to get tired as well. With all the shenanigans that has gone on around, probably we may also benefit. Because the point is, and I think Osiany, the point you're making is very valid. But having worked in the media, and if you've been an insider knowing how the structures in the media operate, then you will understand sometimes the institutional limitations that journalists go through.
Of course.
And these are the kind of things we've been agitating over and over again. That we need research desk within media. We need budget. We need people, fact checkers, as it were.
But
people
still,
who are able to,
Saddique, still, without someone coming out to speak about this, it's impossible to know.
Well, that's but let's remember that this story was already there. It has been 2 years in the writing. But the only difference this time was that a young man with nice hair, he talked about it, and he talked about the gory details of what the individuals did. And I think that's the other thing we need to remember about this story, that it seems people hear the stories when they are told about the individuals. Because before we were just being told Cambridge Analytica, it was anonymous. And we didn't really care. Well, some of us did, but it didn't strike home until a young man said, this is what I saw, and until a camera went undercover and captured people talking cynically.
Does it have to take
it doesn't have to take that.
But really to be able to see that all of a sudden we have an avalanche of toxic material flooding the market and about election. I don't think it does.
No, it doesn't. But when you have the personal touch to the story, that is what makes it now get a lot of attention.
We really shouldn't let media off the hook. I think that they should be out there investigating this, and part of their job, as a media, is to cultivate sources, is to find them. Is to create the relationships that allow a guy like Wiley to come out and speak.
All right. We need to move, and obviously the question that you are asking us right now is, why didn't we know? And the suggestion you're giving is that as media, we needed to know. And there are people who went and researched, there are people who looked at the previous elections, and they found out some things, and they tried to bring it out. And I'll bring that into perspective shortly. But I'd like to say at this point that one of the people who was accused of working with Cambridge Analytica to influence the media and do all these things that were done, and to close our eyes and not to see, was Alex Jamoda, who was working for Jubilee. He was a consultant. We invited him for the show, but Alex felt he cannot speak about that. And we also tried, last week we saw also bloggers writing about John Allan Namu as one of the people who worked with Cambridge Analytica and was enlisted by Alex Jamoda, and he's a beneficiary. And
he's denied all of that.
He denied that. And I'd like to bring some of the denials before I give you closing comments on this. And John Allan Namu was accused essentially of working with Cambridge Analytica. He was enlisted by Alex Jamoda, and he's arguably one of the best journalists in our time, and he was accused working and probably doing his reports in a way that would support the cause of a politician. In his response, he posted on Twitter after he was accused that in a series of tweets, and I'll pick just a few, to all those who would use that opportunity to discredit him and African Censor, the truth will be out, and it will shine a light on the intention for all to see. He was basically telling us that it was a lie. He never worked for this company, and went ahead to deny it. It defies logic why we will commit the limited resources we have to such altruistic ends, only to serve the selfish interest of one party in a political contest. And finally, he says that the false parallels being drawn between himself, his company, and Cambridge Analytica are not just false, they are defamatory, they are meant to put Africa Uncensored and indeed his own credibility in doubt. Now, John Allan Namu, if you can all remember, he's the guy who did a story about the propaganda, how it affected the elections. He went back to 2013, how that negative campaign affected the election. And probably he's one of the few people who at least brought out the aspect of the propaganda. No.
Sorry, let me take a bite on this one. Yes. I wouldn't want to speak specifically about anybody that has been mentioned, because at this time, it's just about allegations that have been levied against them, and everybody has a right to defend themselves. So as my good friend Namu has said, He's a person I've worked with for many years. I hope all of us will be vindicated that these were just accusations, and anybody else that is involved in this would perhaps get an opportunity to be able to, clear their name and, importantly, put the matter to rest in whichever way it will come out. But then, having said that, it's very difficult also at the same time to look at the media environment with the same spectacles. With all these allegations that are coming in, it's difficult. In fact, people are saying the media has lost its credibility. The media is going down every day, and students of media who are at the university and colleges should really be, looking up to so much, I'm sure, from those of us who are practicing in this profession at this time. Because if we let it down, it's like teachers, absconding their classes and not, preparing schemes of work and doing all those kind of things. We will have to look at one point, and I've said this, the media needs some sort of a summit to be able to press a reset button and say, we cannot have these kind of accusations coming and levied against us all the while. We are talking about individuals who, either by errors of omission or commission, were putting this country to nothing less than what we have previously seen. Only that this time, they were arming people with, poisoned edges of information, which, and we know, stays with people for a long time. So the point is, as an institution, should media houses take a bold step to associate themselves with people, perhaps, that have been mentioned on this matter? We demand so much of people who are mentioned in corruption. We say, step aside. We say, do this, do this. Should the media now also take a ground and say, if we have anybody within our ranks, for the good of the product, for the good of the brand, that is said to have done or associated with one or two things, would you step aside and do that? And what interventions, what lessons, importantly, are we learning from this?
Okay.
Let it not be that we are going back to the same circle. Ken, you probably invite us here again in 2022. We'll talk about the same thing.
If
we don't learn anything now.
I'd like to give you gentlemen an opportunity to respond, but there's just breaking news that is coming into our newsroom right now that we need to speak to. We are told that Mijungu is being deported back, and he's currently in a plane headed to Dubai, and our journalists on the ground are reporting that Mijungu has been refused entry into the country, and earlier on there was a scuffle. The police tried to break that battery of journalists who were reporting on this and covering this, and actually we have pictures of some of the journalists who were badly beaten and bleeding by the police. So we understand at this point that Mijungu is in a plane and is headed to Dubai for now. We don't know his onward destination. All right, I'll give you closing remarks, right?
Okay.
I'll begin with Gathara.
I'll say something very quickly about the allegations being made against African Censored and Njoya now. I think we are really playing a game that Cambridge Analytica was doing when we simply report things that are posted by anybody online, without requiring from them, some way of verifying or showing. You can't just put a picture of somebody in front of a Range Rover and you say, okay, fine, that is his Range Rover. How do you know this? And I think this is symptomatic of the very problem that we had that allowed people like Cambridge Analytica to come in. That the media is not actually doing its job. It can't be that people can be rubbished online, and we simply run with it and we say, all right, it's up to them to clear their names. We've got to have a sense in which we demand of the people making some of these allegations to actually demonstrate, And we know we live in we've had an online culture for a long time where people are simply smeared. Wandia spoke about it, earlier on this show. And we have seen even people trying to extort from others, using these sorts of tactics. So I think we should really be careful about simply taking what somebody has put online or allegations that are simply made online without any backing of proof, and to sort of require somebody to come out and defend themselves in a way that is to me is quite deeply unethical.
Okay, Dr. Wandia.
Okay, I'm going to be the teacher here, and I'm going to say, surely even though we are digital, that does not automatically make us global. The media must have an international consciousness. They must know what is happening in other countries. You can't just keep on saying Kenya, 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 and following politicians to villages and not know that some of the rhetoric we are seeing online was seen during the Trump campaign. I mean, how did they not connect the dots? I think we also need to know what is happening globally and not pretend that it's just about Kenya. In fact, even like when you look at even the recent trip to Cuba, and Gathara wrote a piece about that, you know, people go abroad, they give us stories, and then we just accept because it was abroad. You know, this thing of abroad is this mystical place where we don't make the connections between what's happening in London, what is happening in Washington, and what is happening in Nairobi is a very serious problem in the media. And that's why they've missed the story on healthcare, they missed the story on education, which is a global problem, and now they missed it on elections. And back to me as a teacher, we are just not teaching our students to think globally. We are just telling them, here is the camera, here is the pen, write something, it will be published, and that's it. That's not what journalism is anymore. You just have to know what is happening in Uganda and Tanzania and wherever for you to understand what is happening in Kenya, because the media that we are using, the WhatsApps and the Facebook, they are global. So how can we not think globally? So that is how the media missed this problem. And I'm sorry, I'm sick and tired of politicians. We can't keep on watching politicians and call that politics. That's not politics, it's a soap opera. The politics is where are our resources going when it comes to education, healthcare, environment, transport. That is politics. This thing of watching people dancing and saying nonsense and calling themselves elected leaders, that is not politics, and the media needs to get shaken out of that. Stop following the politicians. They'll come to you and they'll tell us what they are doing. But right now, they're wasting our time.
Okay.
Ken, I think we cannot underline this more by saying that never again should the media be caught off guard, sleeping on the job, as it were, on something such as big as this. I mean, we cannot miss the elephant in the room, and you cannot teach that. You can't teach that. It's something that is expected as us as professionals. We need to have the ears, the eyes, and the nose, and even the fingers to be able to put our fingers really on some of these topics and situations. Secondly, this country needs to move very fast and create, data protection and regulation privacy laws. It's about time we had this, and if anything is on the floor of the House, could it perhaps be withdrawn and expanded more to include what you're talking about? Because if we do not have this, then we may as well allow those who brought in Cambridge Analytica here to, take advantage of the loopholes in law and continue to repeat this thing. We are only talking about Facebook now. Do we know about Twitter? Do we know about Snapchat? Do we know about Google, perhaps? WhatsApp? What is it that lies ahead for us? This is just a small tip of the iceberg. Could Cambridge Analytica, their surrogates, and all other manifestations of this thing, could they have happened? Only that probably sitting here now, we don't know about it. Are these things going to confront us in future? And what is it that we're going to do between now and the next time we have to talk about things that have happened so that we protect ourselves? We talk about, unity being our shield and defender. What are these defenders that we are talking about? It's time to see. We need to have national defenders. National defenders should be things that government agencies and bodies that are supposed to protect Kenyans from this kind of thing should be able to move with speed. I am actually very disappointed that sitting here, we haven't seen any government, body or anybody else speaking about this. Certainly because someone would claim it could be an enactment on their part as beneficiaries, alleged beneficiaries of this scam, but who knows? But for my colleagues in the media, and I'm very passionate, perhaps when I stop being a journalist or a media professional, I'll stop singing about this. If I become a doctor or a teacher that I'm trained to be, in future, go back to class and join Daktari, I'll preach books and all those kind of things. But when we are doing this work, we cannot afford to let people down. We cannot. Lives are at stake here. What if Kenya had banned because of these messages here that were propagated? And You may ask, people probably still have it on their phones in terms of WhatsApp and some of his communication. What if we had flagged that up and say, hey, come on guys, you know this is not true. And how do you know it's not true? Because it's been debunked, it's been denied here, and it's been denied here, and this is actually the truth of the matter. Now you let people digest that. Secondly, we would also want to say that how do we as a country then go out of this mess? What is the best situation so that, again, the handshake notwithstanding, we still go and ask questions about this? The handshake should not, prevent the media from now, going up and say, okay, come on, we may have had a handshake, but there are still issues unresolved. Even from an institutional memory point of view, we still have things from the last polls, the last year, that are still not yet done. So, I mean, we are confronted with so much. The point is, how much can the media continue sleeping on the job?
Okay.
And our children's data is being collected. So we are now going to extend the problem to the next generation. We don't know how that data is going to be protected or treated.
Would you throw in the element of those guys who are asking the applications that are running on Facebook?
Yeah.
How many children are you going to have? How are you going to look in 2050? Those kind of apps are now being accused of being used to scheme these kind of things.
I started by pointing out
use small words.
that we do not have these big words come by default from where
But you can take advantage. Mijungu has been deported, so you can be standing Mijungu for this one.
I started by pointing out that we do not even have data protection laws, and as Saddique has re-emphasized, there's a need for us to create them. But who shall help the man speak to the parliamentarian? It shall be the media. The media must decide that it wants to take policy a little more seriously. We are talking about President Kenyatta, for example, being joined by Governor Njoya and the rest, and they were in Cuba. What is the health policy in Cuba? We supposedly went to learn from them, to learn about health. How does it operate there? How far have we gone with the wonderful universal healthcare model in Makueni County? How is it achievable by Governor Kivutha Kibwana and not achievable in Nairobi? What are the gaps missing? We have seen, when you talk transport policy, we have seen the National Youth Service buses starting to charge far less. How come that this country has not had a regulatory body that would regulate what should be charged? You go to most cities, transport within cities is generally affordable in those very contexts. At least for a third world country, it should be far much less or cheaper. So because the general populace is poor. When we talk about housing policy, do we have a housing policy? What does it say? Have you taken interest that recently the MCAs in Nairobi have said that the formerly secluded areas that would not allow, buildings beyond some level, that law was passed by them trying to negate areas, Lavington, those posh areas. Why did they do that? Is it detrimental to our policy structure? Now, from a policy background, I'd really love the media to be attentive to policy issues more than politics. And if they get into politics, then as I have said umpteen times before, you must get to understand and break down to the people the intersection between policy, politics, and power. How do the three interrelate and marry, and are the three able to work for the people? Secondly, media must decide that it will have cogent research, that they will do impeccable research, that a desk will run that counters the narratives that may be pushed by any of the political divides. And that team must be vetted properly so that we achieve as much objectivity as is possible. It cannot rely on one or two people. You must have a pool of people who will do research and push forward what is the truth about what's going on, even as you pick it from different sides.
Okay.
Finally, if at all any organizations in the country were involved in sowing seeds of discord, and they did it for gain, then I have no problem taking them back to the timeless words of Martin Luther King. The arc of the moral universe, not scientific, moral. The arc of the moral universe is long, my friend, but it bends towards justice. I urge a level of conscientiousness. It's a call to conscience. Would we just do what is right done to us? Are we able to do that which our children will be proud to know we did? If we are going to engage Cambridge Analytica, and it's my company, is Ken Mijungu able to stand and say, guy, I wish I could take the money, but this will leave behind for my children a country that I do not wish for. Amen. And media must hold them to account.
Amen.
Good place to end. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I don't think I have anything else to add.